The title of this video is meaningless. It's been encoded with a World War II 3-rotor Wehrmacht Luftwaffe Enigma machine. So if you want to understand what it says, you're going to need one of those. So if you happen to have one, it still won't do you any good unless you know the settings. You're going to need to choose rotors 1, 4 and 2. Install reflector B. Set the start positions for the rotors to P, R and L. The alphabet ring on the rotors to T, C and G. And finally, configure the plug board to SK, NW, BV. If you have all that, then you can decode it. And this explains why I'm here today at Bletchley Park, home of Alan Turing and the Codebreakers. This is the office of Commander Alistair Denniston. He led at Bletchley Park, the government code and cipher school. He didn't really have that much confidence that they would succeed and was known to have said, "You know, the Germans don't mean you to read their stuff, and I don't expect you ever will." Well, Alan Turing, along with other cryptologists Gordon Welchman, Stuart Milner-Barry and Hugh Alexander, went over his head. They wrote directly to Churchill, who did understand the importance, and then gave them the facilities and the resources that they needed. About 4 months later, Denniston was out and replaced by Commander Edward Travis. So I think first of all we need to know, what is a cipher? The simplest form of encryption is the monoalphabetic substitution cipher. So you take the letters of the alphabet and reorder them like this. Then you use those substitutions against your message. So in this case, any A's would become Z's, B's would become A's, C's would become E's, and so on. So let's take our message, subscribe to Mr. Sensible, and then you make those substitutions, giving you the encoded message, and this is what you broadcast. Of course, your intended recipient already has the cipher code, so it's simple for them to reverse the substitution and get back the original message. But what if somebody intercepts it? They don't have that cipher. What can they do? Well, the question is, how many permutations of letters are possible in that cipher key? Well, it's 26 times 25 times 24 times 20. It's the factorial of 26, which is a lot. However, all is not lost. Because the letters are a direct substitution, the frequency of the letters in the original message is maintained in the encoded message, so therefore you can attack it based on the frequency of letters as they appear in a piece of text. For instance, in English, E appears 13% of the time, whereas Q only 0.095% of the time. There's also the first letter of a word frequency. O appears as the first letter of a word 7.6% of the time, whereas X and Z only 0.045% of the time. Then also, of course, you've got double letters. As it's a direct substitution, they will remain as double encoded letters, and you can check for the frequency of those. For instance, LL is the most frequent double letter. Now, this message is way too short for the statistical frequency of the appearance of letters to be of any use. There's another method though. That's to use what is called a crib. If you have any idea of the subject matter of the message, then you may be able to guess one or two words or phrases that might appear in that message. For instance, if this was a wartime message, You might guess that words such as weapon, attack, casualties, target may well appear in that message. Now, as we know that it's a message in connection with my video, we might guess that the words Mr. Sensible appear in this message, and we can see that there's a space for a 2-letter and 8-letter word, so let's just try and fit it in. And we can also see that the 2 S's and the 2 E's in sensible equate to the 2 L's and the 2 T's in the encoded message, so that bodes well. So if our guessed crib is correct, we can take the letters in Mr. Sensible against the encoded message and make substitutions throughout the rest of the message, which gives us this. We've all but decoded the message. Now, it doesn't take a genius to work out that this important message, when it's decoded, reads, "Subscribe to Mr. Sensible," and I'd love it if you did that now. Instead of a straight substitution cipher, the Germans used one of these. In this case, it's a 3-rotor Enigma machine. Enigma machines had been invented in 1919 and had been used in business. During the war, the Germans improved them with further levels of complexity. As long as the sender and the recipient both had an Enigma machine and they both used the same settings, a message could be typed in and encoded and freely broadcast, with the recipient typing in the encoded message at the other end and getting the clear text out. To anyone who intercepted it, it was nothing but gibberish. This meant that as far as the Germans were concerned, orders, reports, intelligence could all be sent, safe in the knowledge that nobody else could read them. So Enigma, at its heart, also relies on character substitution. Each input key, for instance C, is wired to a different output lamp. So if we press C, we get F. I should make clear that this operates from right to left, and this item with the wiring inside that converts a key press letter to a lamp-lit letter is called a rotor, and we'll see why in a minute. So to increase the complexity, Enigma has a 2nd and 3rd rotors. Now when we press C, we no longer get F. No, when we press C, the electrical current goes through the right rotor, centre rotor and left rotor and gives us a D instead. Now that's great, and we've done 3 substitutions. We could add more rotors, or more simply, we could add what's called a reflector to the left-hand side. That takes the output from one letter, pumps it into another letter and feeds the current back the other way. So now if we press C, the current goes through the right rotor, centre rotor and left rotor, on into the reflector and back into the left rotor, centre rotor and right rotor, following a different path, giving us H. So suddenly we've got 6 substitutions. Next, Enigma adds yet another layer of complexity, the plug board. This enables pairs of letters to be swapped. So on entering one letter, it may actually be substituted for another before it even enters the rotor system. And of course, on the way back out, the result may be changed to a different result as well. So now on pressing C, the plug board exchanges it for what would have been a B before sending it through the rotor system and back out. The result comes back as a G, which the plug board then changes to an F. The problem with this is, though, it is still a direct substitution. If I press C a second time, again, I get F. The solution is to change the path the current flows. With Enigma, on every key press, the right rotator moves on one position. Once it's carried out a full rotation, it kicks the centre rotor to move on one position, and so on. So let's move the right rotor on one position and press C again. And this time we get a G. Now all this looks horrendously complicated, but a cryptoanalyst could break this comparatively quickly. The additional problem comes in the setup of the machine. There's a choice of reflectors that can be used. There are 5 possible rotors, 3 of which will be chosen and put on in a particular order. The plug board has a maximum of 10 wires that can cross-connect any individual letters. Each rotor has a chosen start position. Each rotor has a position where it kicks the next rotor over. This all adds up to 159 million setup combinations, which is why Enigma was considered impossible to crack. So most of the work here was done in these famous huts. Let's have a look inside Hut A, Alan Turing's hut. So let's start by having a look in Alan Turing's office. It's surprising how small and dingy this office is for a man who is so critical to the whole endeavour. And of course, one thing Alan was famous for was his tea mug that he kept chained to a radiator for security reasons. Now these huts are very long, with many rooms that you can go in, which are mocked up to look as they would have done during the war. In the next room, large sheets of paper called net sheets were stacked up over a light. They had holes punched in them, and if the light shone all the way through the stack, it indicated that the settings could possibly be correct. In the Typex room, each day's Enigma settings were configured into the Typex machines. The messages were typed in, and hopefully clear text came out. The machines were so noisy they could be heard throughout the hut. Work in Bletchley Park continued 24 hours a day. In this room were always 4 watchmen, usually civilians who were experts in German and able to fill in any missing gaps in the messages before translating them. In administration and typing, reports were written based on the decoded messages and sent to MI6 under the codename Ultra. The Enigma machine was an absolute marvel. You can see this exploded view of the rotor with the wiring inside and the spring-loaded connector pins that will connect to the next rotor. Unfortunately for the Germans, Polish intelligence had been cracking their Enigma codes for 6 years with one of these, a Bombe, a cryptographic bomb, basically 6 Enigmas electrically operated to crack the codes. When the Germans introduced 2 additional rotors, it increased the work tenfold, making it impossible. So they shared their knowledge with the British and French. Utilising this information, Alan Turing invented this, his bombe machine. Each machine was the equivalent of 36 Enigmas. Unfortunately, this bombe is just a mock-up, just a dummy to show you how it looked and sounded when it worked. There were around 211 bombe machines built. Many of the machines were run at other stations around the country, but quite a few were run here at Bletchley, at Hut 11A, the bombe room, where the bombs would be operated to try and decode the Enigma settings. Well, this is all very interesting. It's a fascinating place with lots of exhibits. But what about Enigma and the bomb? Well, I've got a bombshell for you. It's not here. It's now kept at the National Computing Centre, so we're going to have to visit there. Fortunately, the museum is on the grounds of Bletchley Park, although separate. Now, I've been very fortunate to be able to arrange for today to get hands-on with an Enigma machine. But there's plenty else to see in the museum as well anyway. There are all sorts of amazing exhibits, from a Cray 1 supercomputer down to an Atari Woody games console. There's also this, the Harwell Decatron, the world's oldest operating digital computer. It weighs 2.5 tons, but as it's on wheels, you could actually consider it the first example of mobile computing. There is also that most famous of computers, Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic digital computer based on vacuum tubes. It was designed by a research telephone engineer called Tommy Flowers, and Alan Turing's probability work in cryptanalysis helped contribute to its design. It was used in Bletchley Park from early 1944 to help crack the Lorentz cipher code. So have a listen to presentations both about Enigma and the bomb before I get close up and personal with an Enigma.
An operator who was wanting to send an encrypted letter would basically type his plain German version of the message on the Enigma machine, and for every letter that he keyed on the Enigma, he would be presented with the corresponding ciphertext letter, which would illuminate on this lampboard panel. So suppose his plaintext German contained the letter A, key the letter A on the Enigma machine, and we've got the letter Q illuminate on the panel. So essentially the operator's being told that letter Q is his corresponding ciphertext letter for that letter A. If he were to key the letter A again, he's offered a different letter, because now we've got the letter C illuminate. It wasn't a simple one-for-one encipherment, because that would be very easy for Bletchley to decrypt. Keep keying the letter A, and we would find that eventually we would see at some point each one of the 25 different letters illuminate on that number. Enigma physically cannot encipher a letter as itself. So just bear that property in mind, because it was one that the code breakers exploited in order to break the Enigma ciphers. Now the process would have been that the German operator would have had a colleague who would be writing down the letters as they illuminate on the landboard. He would have handed that bit of paper to a wireless operator who would have tapped it out, and it would have gone wirelessly or via radio, whichever term you prefer, to the intended recipient. Now that recipient has obviously got to be able to turn it back into the original German, and to do that they also used the Enigma machine, because the Enigma is a reversible cipher. So providing the recipient of the message has set his Enigma machine up in the same way as the originator had set up his Enigma, if the recipient now keys in the gobbledygook ciphertext that he's received, his lampboard will spell out the original German version of the message. Now if Bletchley Park, because they can intercept the radio messages, if they've got captured Enigma machine or an Enigma analog, and they know the settings that the Germans were using, it would mean that they too could repeat what the German recipient was doing, which was to set up the machine with the correct settings, key in the gobbledygook, and get out the original German version of the message. So it's all about the settings, and that's what the bombe was designed to do, was to help the code breakers to establish what settings the Germans were using on their Enigma machines. Now, inside the Enigma, that's connecting the keyboards and the lamps, are a set of 3 letter scrambling rotors that basically turn one letter into another one. On every keystroke, what you'll notice is that the right-hand one of these 3 rotors advances 1 position on every keystroke. That's effectively changing the electrical connections between the keyboards and the lamps. That's why we were getting a different letter every time a different ciphertext letter every time we keyed the letter A. Now these scrambling rotors, there were 5 variants coming with an Enigma machine, and the operator had to select the 3 out of the box of 5 that were specified on his key sheet here. He also had to insert them into his Enigma machine in the order also specified on this key sheet. That setting was termed the rotor order, and it was one of the settings that the bombe enabled the code breakers to establish. Now, around the outside of these scrambling rotors, there is a rotatable ring, and the position in which that ring has been clipped in place is absolutely one of the crucial settings that you would have to discover if you wish to decipher a message. So each of these rotors had its own ring, with 26 possible ways in which the ring could have been set. So that's 26 times 26 times 26 possibilities for 3 ring settings, which is 17,576. When you multiply that by the 60 out of the 60 possible permutations for the 3 out of the box of 5, you multiply those 2 figures together, you're actually looking at 1 million possible different settings connected with that rotor unit. But why the Germans thought Enigma was invincible relates to the 3rd group along here, or 3rd column along, which concerns the plug board that you can see on the front end of the Enigma. Literally consists of 26 electrical sockets labelled with the letters of the alphabet. And at the start of the day, the Enigma operator took a short piece of electrical cable that had a socket, or sorry, a plug on either end of it, and following the instructions on his key sheet, he would have plugged together a pair of these letter sockets. So for example here, he was told to take a bit of cabling and plug S into X. The effect of doing that would have been to have swapped over the letters S's and X's during the operation of the Enigma machine. 10 pairs of letters were plugged together in this way, and it gave an incredible 150 million different ways you can configure that plug board. So by the time that you've multiplied all the possibilities presented by these three groups of settings, you're up to 159 million different ways in which that machine could have been configured at the start of the encryption process. So that's essentially, if you were Bletchley Park and you were attempting to test a setting by hand, someone has calculated that there haven't been that number of seconds since the Big Bang. So if you were trying to do that by hand, you'd be here for an awful long time and still not managing to create a message. So that's essentially why Bletchley Park had to come up with a machine to speed up the process. With the Bombe, we're not in the computing age because it's an electromechanical device. It's not electronics, but it is an application of the machine in order to solve basically what amounts to a statistical or mathematical problem. So if we move over and have a look at the Bombe. Now if you're going to do what's termed break an Enigma message or recover the settings that had been employed on an Enigma machine when a particular message had been enciphered. If you're going to do that on the Bombe, you have to be able to make an educated guess about what a small portion of your intercepted message had been in its original plain German form. The term used at the time was you had to be able to identify a crib. And the job that we run on the Bombe machine is an example of a message or a group of messages that is ideal for cribbing purposes because day in, day out, the Germans were sending very stereotypical words and phrases that were cropping up day in, day out in their messages. And the job we run is actually a weather report that was sent from a weather ship that Germans had in the Bay of Biscay. The job of this ship was essentially to send a weather report, or in other words, to send a weather forecast of the weather that was likely heading towards continental Europe. Now, if you've got a message or a report from this weather ship, it's a reasonable bet that somewhere in it, the Germans might have enciphered their word for weather forecast, which in German is Wettervorhersage. So what we're guessing is that somewhere encrypted in our message is this particular word, but we have to find out whereabouts in the string of gobbledygook that we've got this might actually be sitting. So what we do is we align our intercepted ciphertext underneath our, we align our plain text crib underneath our intercepted ciphertext. We start at the beginning position. I wonder if anyone can tell me what's wrong with that position.
We've got a letter encoded as itself.
We have, yeah. Thank you, spot on, yep. If you look here, the operator could not have keyed the letter T on his Enigma machine when he was enciphering Wettervorhersage and got the lamp for the letter T illuminate as his ciphertext letter. So we know we're wrong, so we go along one. Yeah, the problem we've got here is the W's, yeah?
And the G.
He couldn't key W and got W. Yeah, and we've got, I think we've got another one.
G at the end.
G at the end, yeah. Lovely, yeah. Okay, so basically keep going. We've got a problem with the E's, yeah. There's two A's here, so that's no good. But if anyone wants to just double check that this one is a good position, what we've got is something that's really useful because we've got a whole series of these plain and ciphertext letter pairs produced as that Enigma machine, that right-hand rotor in the Enigma machine, was advancing one position on every keystroke. What we essentially do on the Bombe is we recreate this sequence, and the Bombe is able to suggest some of the settings that could have given rise to this particular sequence of encipherments in this particular order. So if we have a look at the bombe, what we've got is essentially what we're looking at on the front of the bombe are 36 rotor units from 36 Enigma machines, arranged in 3 banks of 12. Now we only need to run on the top bank for this particular demonstration. If we just take one set of 3 vertical coloured drums, what we're looking at on the top drum here is the equivalent of a rotor from an Enigma machine, the rotor sitting in the left hand of the 3 slots. This is the rotor in the middle slot, and this is the equivalent of the rotor in that right hand slot. So there we go, we've got our 12 sets of rotor units that you can see on the front here. What we're actually testing on the bombe machine at the moment is that the particular arrangement of the drums, we've mounted drums that correspond to Enigma rotors 2, 5 and 3. What we're essentially checking is what was that rotor arrangement in the Enigma 2, 5 and 3 in that order. We know it's the correct one, but during the war they wouldn't have known that, and they might have had to have worked through all the 60 possible permutations. That's where these other 2 banks come in very handy, because we could run the same job but with a different selection and arrangements of our 5 drum types on there. So it was quite a flexible machine in that respect. Okay. Right, so what we do from our crib, because we've got 12 sets of rotors that we see on the front, we select 12 of our plain and ciphertext letter pairs from our crib and assign 1 to each set of vertical drums here. So if we have a look at these 3 on the end here, they are going to be looking, when the bombe is running, they're going to be doing a systematic run through all the 26 times 26 times 26 possible positions of these drums. They're going to be looking for the electrical connection that on an Enigma machine would have been deciphered as an E to an N or an N to an E, because we're talking about a reversible cipher. If we go to the next set of drums along, they're going to be looking for the connection on the Enigma machine that would have been ciphered an E to a V, or V to an E. And we've got the remainder of these sets of drums are going to be looking for other pairs of letters from our crib. Our N to E that we're looking for here occurred after 2 keystrokes at the start of our encipherment of Veta 4 Hessaga. The operator had pressed that key twice when E enciphered to N. So what the code breakers did was to assume that our rotors and their rings at this position, before they keyed the W, were all set to Z, Z, Z. So by the time we get to this encipherment, on that basis, the right-hand rotor would have advanced 2 positions, and we'd be looking at a position of Z, Z, B. So this set of drums that we can see here, we start at Z, Z, B. If we look at E to V, it's 13 keystrokes further along in our sequence. So what we do is we set these drums 13 positions further on. So these are set to Z, Z and P. The effect of doing that is that when this is doing its systematic search, these 3 drums will be finding N to E, but they'll also, at the same moment, because we've advanced it in the sequence, they will find, these set of 3 drums will find that E to V connection, and we'll also come across the point where we'll get all 12 of those letter pairs connections that we're looking for occurring simultaneously on the bombe, and that is the point at which the bombe will come to a halt. Okay, so we've got to do all this ZZB, ZZP setting up on the front. We connect all the rotors units up on the back using this cabling, and then we're essentially set to go. So we'll run it to the first stop. I think you've all had a pretty good look, but yeah, we've had 1 or 2 others just join us, I think. So we'll give it a brief run, but if anyone wants, we can run it again later. for all 12 of those letter pair connections. At this point, the operator would have noted the 3 letters showing against the indicator on these gold and black drums here. These are reading S, N and Y. It's giving us a relative starting position. Our drums don't have adjustable rings like the Enigma rotors. So what this is saying that assuming the rings have been set to Z, 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 the starting position of the rotors would have been S, N and Y. It's giving us a relative starting position, it's not giving the actual one, but that information is useful. At the side of the bomb machine is probably the single most useful piece of information to get off the bomb, because it's suggesting one of the 10 plug-board pairs that might have been in position on the front of that Enigma when our weather forecast had been encrypted. You might think that just to find one when there were 10 plug-board pairs is not very good going, but once you've got that first plug-board pair, the other 9 actually tumbles out relatively easily. Now, having noted that information, the operator would have then restarted the machine and run it until it had cycled through all the possible positions of these drums, and we were back in our ZZBs and ZZP starting position. If we were to do that, we'd find it would stop a further 3 times. So in effect, what we're being offered are 4 alternative suggestions for the settings that have been employed on the Enigma. Now, 3 of them cannot be correct. What's happened during a bomb run is that 3 of the occasions when the bomb stops, it's happened purely by chance. And so the first job at the end of the bomb run is to separate out the occasions when the bomb has stopped purely by chance from the one valid stop, which is going to give us the actual settings on the Enigma that we're looking for. So at the end of that process, you've got all your plug-board pairs, you've worked out what the rotor order was because you've done lots of bomb runs using different selection and arrangements of drums. So all you've got left to do is to establish from the relative settings that we've got here, the actual ring settings and the actual rotor starting position when our weather forecast was enciphered. To do that would have actually involved testing by hand 676 possible ring settings, which might sound like an awful lot of work for someone to have done after they've gone through the whole process of running the bomb. But if you think that we've reduced 159 million possibilities down to 676 left to do by hand, I think the bomb has done a pretty good job. That last stage could be done in a matter of hours, at which point the code breakers have then recovered all the settings that the Germans would have got off their key sheet, which meant that if Bletchley Park is a captured Enigma machine or an analogue, and they did have an analogue and an Enigma machine in the form of their own encryption device that went by the name of Type X. Type X worked on a similar principle to an Enigma machine, and it could be adapted to function just like one. So for this last stage of the process, what the code breakers did was set up Type X with the settings that they've recovered from the bomb and the checking, etc. Set up Type X with those settings, and if you key in the entire encrypted ciphertext that you've got here, you'd get out the whole of the weather report from the Bay of Biscay. Not necessarily the most useful piece of intelligence to win the Second World War, but what you've now got are the settings that would have been used by a whole communications group for the whole of that particular day, which meant that if you'd intercepted the other messages passed between members of that group, they'd be using the same machine settings. And in order to decipher them, you haven't got to run the bomb. Essentially, it's a job just for setting up and keying into the Type X machine in order to recover the original plain German from those messages. And we may well be talking about 100 messages that can be deciphered really very readily by Bletchley Park. Now, obviously, there wasn't just one communications group covering the whole of the German armed forces. And at any one time, Bletchley Park might have been trying to break into as many as 60 of these groups, each of which would be employing their own individual key sheets. So once you've broken one, you've got another 59 potentially to go at. Come midnight, the whole process has got to start all over again because all of the settings will have changed. So you can perhaps appreciate that the 211 of these bomb machines built during the Second World War would have been running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's basically the end of my talk. If anyone...
Finally, it's my chance to play with an Enigma machine.
But
So
now,
inside as well,
came with Paul. Now she was the bomb operator.
you can see the structure of it here. So you've got the 3 rotors.
So that's the reflector there.
That's the reflector. These are the rings that are clipped onto the rotors.
So are these the ring settings that cause this rotor to kick that rotor over, kick that rotor over?
Let me just show you this. Might explain this a little bit.
This lady is still alive. She's absolutely
So this is an expanded rotor, if you
Yes.
will. Okay, so you've got the core of the rotor, and you can see the wiring inside, and then there's the ring that clips on the outside.
The lettering.
This one has letters, those ones have numbers, but
Is that what
it's the same.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
But you can position that in any one of 26 positions on it. Okay, and it has 2 effects. The first is, the letter E, if it's there, is in that place relative to the wiring. If E was around here, it's in a different place relative to the wiring, so it's behaving differently. But the second is these little notches on here, because that's what you were looking for a moment ago.
So that's the one that this one kicks, this one kicks, this one.
So it affects the position.
Yeah. So those are those rings are set around this rotor,
Yes.
and the rotor itself is set to a start position. Is that correct?
On an individual message, yes. I mean, the settings that we're going to get here into some message information, but these are the kind of the daily settings.
Yeah.
And that does not include the start position for a particular message.
Okay.
Okay. What it does do is it includes where the rings are, where they're fitted. It includes which rings you're choosing in the first place.
Yes.
And then it includes all of the plugboard settings.
And it's the combination of ring, start, stacker board that gives you the 159 million
That's
combinations.
right, yeah, you've got 60, in round numbers, 60 for the choice of 3 of the rings. You've got 26 times 26 times 26, roughly 17,500 for the positions of the rings. This is roughly 150 million.
Yes. Yes, that makes up a large part of it, doesn't it?
Huge part. And when you combine the whole lot, you get the 159, just shy of it, 159 million. Okay. What it doesn't include are the settings for an individual message.
Yeah.
Because there are some on top of that.
So am I okay to...
Yeah, have a go, yeah.
Because I was
We'll put the lid down
Okay,
and
but-
you can do a message.
pressing the same letter
Oh my goodness.
each time.
Yep.
It's quite incredible, isn't it? And of course, each letter never comes back as itself.
That's right. Are you okay if I pop that down? Because
Yeah.
it's much more obvious
Yeah.
with, when you can actually see the letters, but do the same
So
thing again.
this is the settings for this individual message, is it? They adjust
So
these.
if we were sending the message, I'll talk you through in a minute how they did it, but just to show how it works.
So we've got settings 6, 10 and 8, haven't we?
Yep. So
Okay.
just type in A, B, C.
So for
Do it
N,
slowly so I've got the time. So
we've got V,
Yep.
R,
You've been to visit the bombs in store
M.
somewhere in
Okay.
Wiltshire.
So now if you are now receiving that message, you would need to know you've got to put this back to 6, 10 and...
Oh, so you're actually reversing.
Yeah, I'll tell you through how they did that in a minute.
Okay. So
But
6,
now-
10, 8,
6, 10, 8. Now if you were to type in VRM,
which was our output.
which was the encrypted
Okay,
text,
so VRM. V is A,
yeah, yep.
is this B, and M was the third one, wasn't it? By golly,
Amazing.
we've cracked the code.
Cracked it.
It's just an amazing thing. Thank you. So this whole spindle comes out, and you take
Spindle
them
comes
off
out,
the
take it
spindle,
apart, and you just put the spindle back in again.
and the connections between each one are spring-loaded pins, aren't they?
Yeah, you can see it a little bit of a guide on
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't take this out.
No, no.
I think you got
Isn't
this
there
earlier.
anything else that...
No, that's it.
Oh, I thought there was another section that lifted up.
Well, lots
Or
of
is
bits
that
lift out, but that's as far as we'll go with them.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I thought that just like this lifted up, I thought there was another section that just lifted. Without dismantling, I just thought there was more fold out,
No,
so
the
obviously
the
not.
kind of the user handling, if you will, for the Germans on the day will have been to have taken these out and
Yeah.
replace the rotors.
And set the
set
stacker
the
board.
stacker board, yeah.
And that's what weather ships did.
It's just, I find it stunning. And I mean, I know it's not an original, but it's still a rather expensive piece of kit, isn't it?
This is a very expensive piece of kit.
It's about, do you say it's this reconstruction is about £17,000?
No, triple that.
This word is been
about 60,000.
somewhere in this.
Wow.
And here is
So if I was just to type a series of letters, this should tick over after 26, unless this is already part way through.
Yeah, I don't know where it is in the cycle.
So can I just have a try?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so you got.
So
give me a U.
here is wrong.
O.
So they move it along in that
Yes.
position and then try the same test again. You
N.
can see here we've got
S.
W. Seemingly ciphering W.
I'm hoping that.
It will eventually.
We go along one.
Go on, do it this one. No.
It's bound to have been, you know, you've got a few more. It would probably just turn before you got here or something.
Yeah. It's actually pressing the keys. Pressing the keys. It's there's not that much pushing effort considering it's moving mechanical stuff.
No.
It must have literally just moved over, hasn't it?
Must have done. Yeah.
You did right, Mr. Sensible.
Have you no idea how many you've done?
No.
There
There we
we go.
go. There we
It
go.
must literally
It just ticked it then.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course you have to wait a whole lot longer for the one on
Yes.
the end here.
Yes. Would that be original? Because obviously there's only storage for two there.
No, but they would have transported it with them in here.
Plugged
So
in.
there's
And then,
spares.
so take a bunch off then.
Spares. Yeah.
So are these plastic or is it Bakelite or something?
It would have been Bakelite in the wall.
Oh, the original. Okay. I see. And so these hooks here, is that to hook this on?
Three vertical drums.
And there's a handle somewhere? Or where's the handle?
Yeah, it's just around the back, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah, yes it is. Just on the back.
The motor that's in the left-hand slot as you're looking at
I mean, I look at this and I think it's just a thing of beauty. It's absolutely stunning, isn't it?
So you've got one rotor.
What an amazing day and an incredible story. I would thoroughly recommend that you visit both Bletchley Park and the National Museum of Computing. I'll put links in the description of the video. I'd like to say a special thank you to one of the volunteers, Neil, who gave me the close-up tour of the Enigma machine. If you recall, earlier on, we looked briefly at Colossus, the world's first electronic digital computer that's operated with these valves. Well, I was very fortunate to have been given a small gift. This, one of the valves that has been recently replaced on that Colossus machine. How special. So what about Alan Turing? Alan Turing was a true British hero. He was pivotal in the start of computing. His work was not known in his lifetime. In 1952, he was arrested for gross indecency. At that time, it was a crime to be a homosexual. He was chemically castrated, and in 1954, sadly, ended his life by taking cyanide. The work at Bletchley Park was kept secret until the 1970s, with the full story not really being known until the 1990s, with some aspects only being released in April 2012. It's estimated that the work at Bletchley Park shortened the war by between 2 and 4 years, saving 14 to 21 million lives.